Okay, so that sheet covers essentially everything you need to know for this lab. So if you can identify everything on this sheet on the bone models, then you're doing awesome. It might be helpful, like I said last week, to highlight in your lab manual these terms on these specific bones, so you're not looking at all of these extra terms that are in your lab manual. Kind of up to you how you want to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of quickly run through a few diagrams and point out some pieces of these bones that are a little bit difficult to figure out, kind of give you a few little tips and tricks to identifying the different pieces of these bones. And then what you're going to do in lab is basically go around to these stations. And this is how the practical will be set up essentially. So there'll be bones set out with tape on them. And you'll identify either the bone, if I ask for the name of the bone, or the feature of that bone where the tape is. So this will kind of give you a little bit of practice as to what the next practical will be like. So we have one more lab after this, the joints lab, which is next week. And then the lab practical is after that. So the lab practical is in 2 weeks. So there will be plenty of time to review next week. I'll have a lot of bones out, so you can look at them and kind of review before the practical. So the next week lab isn't that intense. It's just over the joints and body movements. Okay. Let me pull this up here. All right. So the first bone, the clavicle. All you have to know is that it's the clavicle. You don't have to know any additional pieces. It's just this kind of short little wave of a bone. Nothing really difficult to identify with that, as long as once you see the clavicle, you probably won't mix it up with anything else. Okay, so no features on there that you need to know. The scapula, I think everyone kind of can identify the scapula, the shoulder blade on its own. The pieces that you'll need to know, I want to point out a few of them here. So you have these two parts that stick off the top of it. You have the coracoid process, which is, to me, it looks like a weird little crooked finger. I don't know why that helps me remember it, but it does. And then the acromion is behind that. So this is looking at the front, basically. If you're looking through the body, this would be the anterior side of the scapula. If you flip the scapula over, it has this long spine. That's what the acromion is coming off of. So if you can find the spine, which is really easy to find, the acromion is basically the end of that spine. So those are two parts that you'll want to know. So here you have the spine and the acromion. And then the medial and the lateral border. So the tough part with the appendicular skeleton is figuring out if you're looking at a left or right piece, right? So we have left and right arms, left and right scapula, left and right hip bone. So figuring out which side of the body you're looking at is important. And I'll ask you on the practical, is this a right humerus or a left humerus? Is this a right scapula or a left scapula? So you want to be able to orient yourself, knowing that the front is the smooth part, and then you have a lateral border and a medial border on each scapula. That just refers to, is it on the lateral side of the body or is it on the medial side? The medial side is near the spine, right? So if you think about your scapula, the medial side is on the inside near the spine. And that's the part that's pretty much straight up and down. It kind of matches, or it's almost parallel to the spine. That's the medial. The lateral border kind of has more of an angle to it. And also has the glenoid cavity at the top of it. That's a really important feature. The glenoid cavity is where the humerus actually attaches to the scapula. So your arm bone attaches to the rest of your body at the glenoid cavity. If you can find the glenoid cavity, you know that's the lateral border, right? Because your arm attaches to the lateral side. It doesn't attach to the medial side. That would be weird. Okay, so lateral and medial border, a little difficult to figure out, but when you look at a scapula today, kind of look at it and try to get a feel for that. Okay, and then the humerus, I'm not going to go through each of these terms that are on the handout. I'm just going to point out a few of the main ones. the tougher ones, like I said, to figure out. So the humerus, you want to know the head of the humerus. That's what articulates with the scapula. And then figuring out what the front and back of the humerus is will help you figure out if you're looking at a right or a left. And in a lot of ways, the humerus and the femur, you can kind of figure out what the back is of both of those bones based on this really deep fossa or indentation. If you have this, if you see a really deep indentation, that's the back of the humerus. It's also the back of the femur. So you know you're looking at the back. That just helps me orient, basically. So if you find this deep depression, that's the back of the humerus, and you know that you're looking at, because the head of the humerus is going off to the left a little bit, this is going to be a right humerus, because it's going to attach to the scapula, right? So there's that aspect of the humerus. And then there are epicondyles at the end of it that you'll need to know. That goes back to the lateral and the medial again. So this is where you have to know if you're looking at the front or the back. The lateral is going to be on the outside, the medial will be on the inside. So that lateral medial stuff can kind of throw you off. And by inside, I mean closer to the body, the medial side. Okay, elbow region, I'm gonna fly past. We're not really looking in detail at that. Okay, the antebrachium, the forearm. So here you have the ulna and the radius. The ulna has a really important feature called the olecranon, which sticks off the top of here. You can see it, it's very distinctive. That's your elbow. So the olecranon is your elbow. If you feel your elbow, that's your ulna. It's the very top of your ulna, and it's called the olecranon. In addition, what else? The radius and the ulna both have what are called styloid processes, which if you look at your wrist, and you can see the bony projections on either side, those are the styloid processes of the radius and the ulna. So they each have one. And on the bones, it basically just looks like a little piece of bone that's sticking down a little bit at the end. The hand, the carpals again, if I ask you them, it'll be for bonus points. Learn them if you want to. If not, you won't get any points off. Just know that this is know the region. Like if I say what bones are these, you can say carpals. Then just know the metacarpals, and then the phalanges as well. So proximal, middle, distal, and remember the thumb only has two, just a proximal and a distal. There's no middle one in the thumb. The pelvis is sort of complicated. I would say it's probably the most confusing part of the appendicular skeleton to try to orient yourself to and figure out what the heck is going on. So you can have, these are the two separated coxal bones. So what's showing here is one coxal bone, second coxal bone, and then the sacrum in the middle. So the sacrum is that bony plate at the base of the spine, right? So you have two coxal bones coming together and articulating with the sacrum. So figuring out which way is up on these is kind of difficult. So first you want to look for this big indentation. That's where the femur fits in. It's the acetabulum. So you know that has to be on the outside, right? Because your femur fits into the outside of your hip, not the inside. So here we have an acetabulum. So that's going to be the outside. And then figuring out which way is forward is the tougher part. And I have it backwards. So if you remember, there's three bones that make up the coxal bone, technically. So the coxal bone is really three fused bones, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. So you have the ilium on top, the ischium a little bit further down and in the back, and then the pubic bone comes out in the front, and they'll meet at that pubic symphysis. So if you can find the pubic bone, which sticks out, it really juts out a lot, you know that's the front of the pelvis. So here, I don't have the sacrum, but this is what the pelvis would look like together. So figuring out, knowing how this is oriented is going to help you figure out what bone is what, the ilium, the ischium, the pubis. And then also the greater sciatic notch, which you'll need to know. So yeah, take a look at that and make sure you can kind of figure out how those go together. There we go. Okay. What else on the hip bone? Okay, I think those are the main pieces. Oh yeah, there's just an image of them separated. So you can kind of look at them from two different directions, the outside, the lateral, and then the medial view of it. And again, you don't need to know all of those terms. You need to know very few of those. This is what's in your lab manual. Highlight what you need to know and ignore all the rest, unless you want to learn them. More power to you if you want to. Okay, so the femur, all you need to know is the head of the femur. And the head of the femur is very obvious. That's what's fitting into the acetabulum of the hip. Again, you want to figure out if you're looking at a right or a left femur. Here you have that big, like I said, with the humerus, there's a big indentation in the back of the femur. So in the back of the femur, you have a big kind of cavity. You know that's the back. And since you know the femur is connecting to the outside of the hip, you can imagine that this is going to be a right femur because it's got to connect to the outside of the hip, right? If we're looking at the back of it. That's the only feature you need to know on the femur, really. And then the lower leg. So we have the tibia and the fibula. The tibia is the big one, the fibula is the tiny one. The fibula is on the outside, on the lateral side of the tibia, right? So your fibula is always lateral to the tibia. And that's how you're going to figure out whether you're looking at the lateral or the medial malleolus. So both of them have malleoli, which are the ankle bones, if you remember me saying that in lecture. So the bones that stick out of your ankle, those are the malleoli of each of those bones. So because the fibula is always lateral on the outside, that has the lateral malleolus, this piece that kind of sticks down a little bit. The medial is on the tibia. So here you have the lateral malleolus on the fibula, medial malleolus on the tibia. So this is where all those terms are coming into play again, distal and medial and lateral. What else do I have on there? That's pretty much it, okay. So that's the lower leg. And then the foot, the tarsals, again, if you want to learn them, go for it. The one you'll want to be familiar with as we move forward, and I'll talk about it in lecture when I talk about the ankle tomorrow, I think I'll get to it. The calcaneus is your heel bone. So if you feel your heel, that's your calcaneus. It's the really big tarsal bone. That's important because that's where the Achilles tendon attaches. So the Achilles tendon attaches right off the back here, which is obviously a pretty important tendon. So it'll attach to the calcaneus bone. Other than that, the metatarsals and then the phalanges again. Okay, so what you're going to do today, like I said, I have a sheet here. You're just going to fill out, so you're going to walk around to these different stations, look at the numbers that I've put on each of them. If it says name of bone on the tape, obviously I just want the name of the bone. If there is a number pointing to something, I want whatever that feature is that it's pointing to, or it's not pointing to anything, but it's just stuck on a feature, I want the name of that feature. You can use your notes, your lab manual, work together, that's totally fine. This is really just to get you some practice identifying these different pieces of the appendicular skeleton. This is not everything, obviously, it's only 15, there's only 15 questions. But there should be, oh, I gotta put the headphones back. There's a question in the middle of each of the tables, basically, or multiple questions, but a set of bones in the middle of each lab bench. So just work your way around. That's all you have to do today. If you want to stay and look at some more bones, that's totally fine. And if you're totally lost on how something is oriented and can't figure something out, please ask. I don't want you to be frustrated and confused, but it's fairly straightforward. working with people helps a lot, I think, but you can work on your own if you want to. And I think that's it. Any questions? Okay, I'll hand out these sheets and then